I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Sometimes it takes a different approach to help you unlock your true potential. Capella University's game-changing FlexPath format helps you learn at your own pace and fit earning a degree into your life. From before you enroll to after you graduate, you'll be supported by people who are invested in your success so you can pursue your goals knowing that help is available if you need it. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network.
So I have Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler, author of the new best-selling book, Bold. And I definitely recommend this book. It's called Bold: How to Go Big, Create Wealth, and Impact the World. And it was totally an inspirational book. And Peter and Stephen, before I finish the intro, I just want to say why it was inspirational to me. I am so sick of doom and gloom media. Every day you open the newspaper and it's like, oh, Greece debt is going to topple the world and it's the end of everything. But you guys wrote Abundance a couple of years ago. Now you have Bold. There's always this optimistic view that makes sense where technology is moving ahead so fast, it's basically going to surpass all this doom and gloom news that's out there. Do you get that reaction from your books, from readers of your books?
Yeah. I think it's one of the reasons that people are drawn to it is we are saturated by every news media on the planet bringing negative news to your television in high definition over and over and over again in every news media we have. And I think people need to not only hear the good news, but have a mindset that allows them to say, okay, just because the news media tells me this doesn't mean that's the way the world really is. There's a cognitive bias. And Stephen, over to you, pal.
Yeah, I mean, James, he's not wrong. The way the brain filters information. Yeah, it means Peter's right.
Were you being passive aggressive there, Stephen? He's sort of wrong. I wish he was wrong just once, but
there's this great Wolfgang Pauli story where Wolfgang Pauli was like 18 or 19 years old and heard Albert Einstein give a lecture, and Einstein was already famous at this point, and I think had won the Nobel. And afterwards, Pauli stood up and said, what Mr. Einstein said, it was not so stupid.
So yeah, do you have people come up to you and say, listen, you guys are ignoring the massive U.S. debt, all these economic things, healthcare, blah, blah, blah. Do you get that?
Of course we get it. But we also, abundance is chock-a-block with statistics about, what the world is really like now and how much progress we've really made in the past 100 years. And the numbers, are staggering. We live at the most peaceful time in the history of the world. Violence has dropped 500-fold since the Middle Ages. Poverty has dropped 50-fold in the last 50 years, more in the past 50 years than any time in the previous 500. We can go on and on and on. The more interesting question is, why are people so biased to the negative news and unable to look at kind of the bigger picture?
And why do you think that is? Is that a cognitive bias? Like, again, like if you are in the jungle, like our ancestors, and you see a lion over here and, I don't know, a cherry tree over here, you're going to pay more attention to the lion, to the negative news in front of you.
Well, you're absolutely correct, right? Our brain evolved in an era of immediacy, and the first order of business for the brain is survival, right? So the first filter all incoming information makes is the amygdala. It's our danger detector, right? So normally we are biased towards negative information. In fact, there's some new research out that says, I don't know if this is exact, so I'm hesitant to quote it, but it says you need about 6 or 7 kind of positive facts to dislodge one negative fact in just terms of the cognitive weight the brain gives it because of its neural architecture.
I sort of feel like that's a negative fact now that I need some positive facts to get over it. But we're going to get to that because I want to get straight to your 6Ds. Your whole point is the world is essentially being overrun by these exponentially growing industries and businesses. And I want to get to the 6Ds that you use to model out what is an exponential business. And maybe you can help me define each one. So digitalization is the first one that you guys talk about. That's sort of the obvious one, like the internet is digitalizing everything. But is there something, extra you want to say about that?
Only that, when you digitize something, which is the term I would use as the first of the 6Ds, and turn it from analog, from like a handwritten page into ASCII type on your computer, the ability to duplicate it perfectly at marginally zero cost is what makes it so interesting. And then the ability for computers, which are getting faster and faster and faster, we use the term Moore's Law, this exponential growth of computing power to act on that digital information. And it effectively starts you onto the 6Ds when you digitize something. And the challenge becomes, and again, this is the cognitive biases that Stephen talked about. We evolved as humans in a time when the world was very linear. Nothing changed year to year to year. Things were the same for a century, for a millennium. And as such, we have a linear cognitive bias. When we see something growing, even exponentially, 0.01 doubling to 0.02 to 0.04 to 0.08, it all looks like zero. And that's a challenge. And so it's deceptive in the early growth of exponentials. That's the second D, until it becomes disruptive.
Right, and you mentioned that particularly with 3D printing, that it took a long time to go from that 0.01, 0.02, 0.04 before people realize, hey, we're going to eventually be able to print like an aircraft.
Yeah, and it's the same thing for all of the, digital cameras, computers. People get, I go and I speak, as does Stephen, to amazing audiences around the world. And I'll ask the question, how many of you know about 3D printing today? Everybody raises their hands, right? We all know about it. I say, how many 5 years know about it? 10 years, 20 years. And at that point, no one has heard about it 10 years ago, let alone 20. It's a 30-year-old technology. It's just been in deceptive growth for 30 years.
I like that phrase, deceptive growth, that it was growing just as fast 20 years ago, but now we notice it because it's big enough. Like, what industries do you feel right now might be in deceptive growth that we don't realize yet?
James, I think the indicator we point to in bold kind of for when things are kind of moving out of the deceptive phase and into, the next stage and into the real world is the development of a user-friendly interface. And this is what you're seeing kind of across the boards. 3D printing, now not only everybody has heard of it, but there's 3D printers that are plug and play. If you can point and click a mouse, you can print in 3D. Children can print in 3D. The same thing with robotics. If you go back 5 years, right, you would have to be, to cite your alma mater, a Carnegie Mellon computer scientist if you wanted to program a robot. Today, we have Baxter. It's $22,000, so it's available at a price point to almost any entrepreneur. And you move Baxter's arms in the direction that you want Baxter to move, and he duplicates it. A child can program robotics at this point. And
I guess the same occurred with the internet. Like, the internet had been around since the early 70s, but it was only Mark Andreessen coming out with Mosaic that let the population access it.
And it's not only the population, it was the ability for people to start making money using it, and for entrepreneurs to begin using it. And that the notion of entrepreneurs using Mosaic and then the font browsers to build businesses is what allowed it to explode. So what we look for and talk about is, where's the user interface allowing people to now begin to build new business opportunities. And 3D printing is one. Virtual reality, virtual worlds is another one that is going, I believe, from deceptive to disruptive this next few years.
What's another one? Like, I sort of see, I like how you're kind of almost defining the tipping point of these exponential industries, which so Malcolm Gladwell wrote the tipping point, but he never quite identified how you identify a tipping point. And I like this way of defining what a tipping point looks like when the user interface is there and simple to use. So what's maybe another thing? Like, you discuss in the book synthetic biology. Like, is that going to start reaching a tipping point?
I think that's what you're seeing with synthetic biology, and it's not quite there, right? But the idea there are people already working on the DNA typewriters, basically, so you can essentially program DNA using a laptop, right? It'll be a user-friendly interface for synthetic biology. And you're getting, bits and pieces, the biobricks that are coming out of MIT's iGEM competition, which are basic SynBio modules, right? With their functions clearly defined that are sort of plug and play.
What does that mean? What's coming out of their contest? I don't know.
So what's coming out of the iGEM contest is they're building a library of what they call biobricks. These are basic, DNA strings of DNA code that are very, very, very simple, perform one simple function, right? And these things are being cataloged in the library. Peter might know what the number is up to right now. I don't know how many they have in the catalog at this point, but it's been going on for 7 or 8 years at this point, and it's getting fairly extensive. And this is, again, one of those things you're going to need in place to have that user-friendly interface. So I think, I think Peter's right that the timeline for virtual reality is over the next year. I think synthetic biology, we're going to see movement in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I agree with that. And can I give a little context here for the folks listening in?
Sure.
Of abundance versus bold. Abundance was written as a way of where we're going to be in 20 or 30 years. And it was really to shake up people's point of view of this negative future of, hell, we're living in the most exciting time ever in human history, and the future is much better than you could possibly imagine. And here's why in detail. But bold was written as the how-to side, the roadmap, if you would, for entrepreneurs to get us to this abundant future, with the realization that the world's biggest problems, the grand challenges, are the world's biggest business opportunities. And, the saying that I like to use is, you want to become a billionaire, help 1 billion people. And so bold is the roadmap, the how-to manual for entrepreneurs. Whether you're a technologist or not, to be very clear, you don't have to be a technologist to be using these technologies. And we describe people who are not technologists using 3D printing, using network and sensors, even beginning to use synthetic biology as a means of thinking about the future of programming and DNA. But these are the most powerful tools that if you want to take on one of the world's grand challenges and create extraordinary wealth and create this world, that's why we wrote Bold, and that's how we wrote Bold. I think, Stephen, you said something very important last time, which was, when you looked at the book again, there is a useful how-to element almost on every page.
Well, it's interesting because the way I see the book, it's almost like the Wayne Gretzky quote, don't skate to where the puck is, skate to where the puck is going. So if you see that, for instance, 3D printing is, let's say, doubling its capacity every year, and you know that a problem that exists is getting new electronics up to the International Space Station, then you could kind of take those two ideas, intersect them, and create a 3D printer for eventually for electronic products that could exist on ISS, and you've solved a major problem.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about
I was going to say Ray Kurzweil talks about that really well. Peter's partner in Singularity University, inventor and now head of AI at Google. He said you can't invent technologies for the world where the world is today, right? Because the market's going to pass you by. You have to invent technologies for where the world's going to be.
Well, it's interesting because you also discuss very, let's call them linear technologies, but how exponential technologies can make them either better or more efficient. So, for instance, my kid wears Invisalign braces, and now I guess Invisalign braces are being made with 3D printers. So it's not necessarily the end of linear businesses, but they become much more efficient and powerful when combined with some of these exponential ideas.
Well, the crazy thing about like the Invisalign braces, right, is it's not just that they're being 3D printed. It's that they're printing 17 million individual pairs a year, right? Individually customized for individual customers, 17 million of them in a factory of the future that's not much bigger than a school auditorium. That's a level of scale that we entrepreneurs have never been able to play at.
Yeah, and it's operating 7/24 in the dark with no human intervention. I mean, that's the interesting thing.
So what's interesting about that, it reminds me of when cars replaced horses. So everybody thought everybody was going to lose their job, all the people who dealt with the horse industry. And clearly that did not happen. We had a massive century of growth. But where do you see if basically AI, robotics, and 3D printing are coming along, they're going to, even Foxconn, you mentioned, is going to eliminate 1 million jobs. So where do you see this intersecting with the job market in the long run?
So there's a debate here, and the debate basically says that throughout history, there has been displacement of individuals. We used to be 2/3 of Americans were farmers, and now it's down to below 2%, again, displaced by machinery, robotics, and the such. And the question is it different this time? And a lot of this got a conversational start a couple years ago when the Martin School at Oxford said in the next 20 years, 48% of U.S. jobs will be displaced by AI and robotics. And, the challenge is that for a lot of jobs, that's okay. The Gallup did a poll recently that showed that 70% of Americans don't enjoy their jobs. And, if you are working to put food on the table or get insurance for your kids, not because it's your highest calling, if a robot could do that job for you and you could, in fact, do what you enjoy more and uplift yourself to a higher level job, that's a great thing. Now, is that going to decimate certain jobs? Absolutely. Is it going to create new jobs? Absolutely. Will the balance be a net positive or negative? I think we're going to find out.
Well, let's talk about that. So your next D is disruption, and a classic example right now, two classic examples are Uber and Airbnb. So Airbnb is practically decimating the whole.
Actually, the next D is dematerialization, and then demonetization, and then democratization. Maybe we should add disruption is a D as well, but
I have it down as disruption. My mistake.
Yeah. So dematerialization is when the things that we physically had, our GPS on the dashboard of our SUV, a flashlight, a camera, a video camera, all those things have physically dematerialized onto an app on our phone. And do you want to take demonetization, Stephen, with Uber?
Actually, I want to talk about dematerialization for a second because I love the example in the book where you added up the prices of every app that's on my phone right now and their 1982 prices, and they were like $900,000 in 1982, but they're basically on my phone now for a few $100s.
not just your phone, but the teenager in Mumbai's phone as well.
Right. And so that's related to the democratization aspect as well. Like we all have access to the same tech. And so,
Stephen, over to you, pal.
You asked me to talk about demonetization.
Yeah, sure.
This is what happens in demonetization is after, the tools themselves start dematerializing, the money comes out of the industry. We saw this with Kodak. Kodak, went bankrupt because they had built their entire business on the chemical processes in the photographic paper, and those became demonetized, right? Pictures became digitalized. We found ways to share them via Instagram, and suddenly this long-standing market was no longer there. And we saw this over and over. Right? Craigslist, advertising, Uber, taxis.
Why didn't Kodak get into the very simple business of sharing photos? It's not rocket science to share photos.
But Peter talked about this earlier, right? The human brain did not evolve to process exponential change. Kodak's astounding, right? They invented the digital camera and they created Hendy's law, which governs the exponential growth of pixels per dollar. It's literally the writing on the wall, and they put it there themselves. Right? Nobody was in a better place to see this, but this technology, the brain does not process it. One of the reasons, we spend a lot of time in Bold talking about the mental toolkit you need to play in today's world. One of the reasons you need this mental toolkit is because the rate of progress is literally invisible.
Yeah, you have this great quote from Steve Jobs. It's better to be a pirate than join the Navy. And I get this question a lot. Like you always see when an entrepreneur pitches a VC, the venture capitalist inevitably asks, well, why can't Google just make this or some other big company? And the reality is the big companies aren't really in the business of making small companies, that are going to then grow exponentially.
Well, and it's even worse than that, which is large companies have a tendency to protect what they have. And the day before something is truly a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea. And most big companies don't try crazy ideas. You didn't have Enterprise Rent-A-Car or the large taxi fleets or the automotive industry create Uber, right? In fact, if you had gone to the largest taxi fleets and limo fleets and rental car companies and said, listen, 5 guys in a garage are never going to buy a single car, but they're going to create an app and it can be worth $40 billion and displace 65% of the taxi business in San Francisco, you would have said, I'm smoking something. And that's the challenge that and the whole reason we wrote Bold today is that entrepreneurs are able to take on and experiment and do crazy things more than ever before because the tools we now have, everyone listening to this, the tools you now have exceed what the biggest companies and the governments had 20 years ago, right? You got access to the world's information on Google. You have the ability to design and then 3D print on the cloud through 3D printing technology. You have more computational power than the government had 20 years ago on Amazon Web Services. You have amazing things, and our goal here is to say, hey, wake up. The things you can do, the challenges you can take on, the businesses you can create are extraordinary. It's time to stop doing photo sharing apps and start doing something really big. In fact, today, a project that was in secret just got announced, a company that I'm a founding director of called Hyperloop Technologies. And it's a group of, half dozen of us that are working on turning Hyperloop, the idea that Elon publicized and popularized a couple years ago, making it real and revolutionizing transportation.
Can
that's
you describe it now? Can you describe it, Peter? What is Hyperloop?
Hyperloop is the ability to move supersonic through a tunnel system, if you would. Imagine hopping in Los Angeles, where I live right now, into a Hyperloop station, into a capsule that moves through a tube, through effectively fluid dynamics of air moving at high velocities, and end up in Las Vegas 20 minutes later. So instead of driving for 4 hours, you're going supersonic, or moving cargo. It's the ability to move at supersonic speeds at very low cost, point to point, nation to nation, city to city. And we'll start to see these kinds of revolutions occurring, not from a government, not from Boeing, but from a small entrepreneurial team.
Right. So, you make predictions that are way out because you're able to use these different formulas for each of these Ds. So, for instance, you say by 2025, we should be able to print electronics on the ISS. Is that, when you're making these predictions, 10 years is a long time from now. People have a hard time even predicting, rain or snow the next day. Like, can we say with confidence using these Ds that this is what is going to happen?
Well, I would say I'm on the board of 3D Systems, which is the top 3D printing company in the world, and I'm watching the technologies being designed and developed right now for being able to 3D print circuitry into devices. So I think it's without question. We saw the first 3D printed car this year, the first 3D printed apartment building, and we're starting to see 3D printing in micro devices that you'll inject, micro robots you'll put into the body. We're just at the equivalent of the early Apple image writer. Remember that thing used to go, and dot make print? Right? That's where we are in 3D printing compared to what we have in our home right now. Thank you. I appreciate you laughing there, Stephen. I could do that again. Anyway, instead of compared to what we have today, high resolution color that we think nothing of, that's sitting at your desk. You probably have 2 or 3 of them at home right now.
Now, let me ask you a question just based on your interaction just now. You've written 2 books together. What was the hard part of writing books together? I've written a book with my wife, by the way. It was pretty hard at points. Hard. Yes.
We work together really, really well, James. I mean, now, there are ground rules, right? Like, we both will lose our temper for sure. Like, you're going to, right? You can't write a book without losing your mind at least a couple of times along the way. We just don't take it very personally. And it's just, so at all. And
Peter might disagree with you right now.
No. Actually, it was the most seamless, easiest thing. I mean, we woke up one day and say, shit, we finished a book. When did that happen? It was one of the most enjoyable experiences I've ever had. I mean, Stephen and I would get up, Stephen's crazy. He gets up at like 4 a.m. in the morning and starts working. I've been a night owl, but he shifted me, and I'd get up at 6 and spend an hour. We trade chapters or sections and read it out loud and work it. And it was really a joy. It was fun. And twice over, it was amazing. And our wives joke that we were each other's mistresses.
Well,
it was rare. It's a rare thing.
It was a great. I mean, it's been an absolute blast to co-write these books together. We've had so much fun.
So I want to ask you about kind of the Internet of Things and sensors. And you mentioned kind of we're eventually heading to a world where there are trillions of sensors, and that between satellites and sensors, we're going to be able to map out every 1/2 meter around the world. And you pose the question. For instance, you can ask the question, do you want to know how many cars are in your competitor's parking lot in Moscow? And now, of course, that sounds like a very optimistic question to be able to ask. It'll improve competition, it'll improve information and knowledge. But where's, and I hate to almost ask the cliche question here, but what is the issue of privacy when this happens?
Well, first of all, by the way, I don't know if you heard this announcement yesterday. Samsung announced they have a television, and it's meant to be a television you don't need a remote for, so you can talk at the television. But the television literally monitors all of your conversations, which to me, that sounds a lot like Big Brother is here. But the point is what is happening with sensors is we are getting access to literally unlimited information. Right. That is the upside. What we are trading for it is privacy. And we are moving, more and more and more towards radical transparency. And, on a certain level, at least we'll be making different mistakes this time around.
Yeah, I talk about this a lot, as does Stephen. We're asked about this all the time. And my comment is, listen, privacy is dead. It's long been dead. We're going to actually have to change the way we think and our morals and our ethics. I have 2 3.5-year-old boys. I have to teach them when you do something publicly and it's recorded, it's there forever. Compared to when I was a kid, I was a teenage terrorist building explosives and things like that. And, if I was ever caught, but I think we passed the 17-year.
Oh, by the way, yeah,
there
is this when we tell the story about you blowing up your neighbor's swimming pool?
Or I read one story where you built a rocket and the stages went off at different points, and so the rocket was basically chasing you all over the field.
It was ICBM that set fire to the field. Yeah, I mean, lots of these things. But we're heading towards a world where you are going to be able to know anything you want, anytime you want, anywhere you want. And it's from satellites on orbit today that can deliver you high definition video from orbit. I mean, this is the stuff that only the CIA and the FBI had. Now you can have it if you want to, right? And then drones. We're going to have an explosion of drones, and you may say, well, not over my house. Well, listen, when the drone is autonomous and so cheap and sending encrypted links that you can't track down, you're not going to know whose drone it is. And if it costs $1 for the drone or 50 cents for the drone, people are going to deploy them and image things whether you want it or not. And then whatever Google Glass becomes, they're going to be imaging things at millimeter resolution. We're going to be able to know and sense anything. Now, what you do with that data is now the interesting thing, right? Because Steve and I talk about in the book, and it's so true, the next decade is going to be defined by data-driven companies. Uber, Airbnb, Google, Facebook are all data-driven companies. In fact, if you're not a data-driven company, I think the proper English is ain't going to survive.
It's interesting about Uber, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. I sort of think of Uber as not a taxi hailing service, but as a, massive logistics / workforce service. So on the one side, you have people who need things and are willing to pay for them. In the middle, you have logistics. And on the other side, you have a workforce, in this case, cab drivers or limo drivers who are willing to provide a service. But there could be anything. That could be any service with that logistics software in the middle. And it seems like a whole slice of the GDP is going to be taken over by services like Uber or Airbnb or these disruptive technologies.
Yeah, and absolutely true. And that's, of course, what they see themselves as. And as they experiment with helicopter rides or delivering you food or delivering you puppies. I mean, literally the stuff they've experimented with. It's a logistics service. And the other flip side, of course, is that Google with their autonomous car is going to move into that same service. And now Travis, the CEO of Uber, is getting very concerned that the disruption of his company is going to be autonomous cars. So he's beginning to focus on investing in autonomous cars right now.
It's interesting how, when people complain about, let's say, jobs lost or privacy, what really could be happening deep down is just sort of a nostalgia. Like people are going to be nostalgic for the privacy of blowing up your backyard or nostalgic for driving a car through a stop sign, just one more time. So, everything really is changing. And like you say, it's over the long term. So, and our brains resist these things that aren't happening. Our brains resist things that don't stay the same, essentially.
Well, it's a cognitive bias, right? This is Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for discovering this. We have something called loss aversion. And it's, at an emotional level, a simple level, it's what keeps us stuck in ruts. The idea is that whatever you have today, if I take it away, your brain automatically believes that whatever is going to come and replace it is going to be a lot worse. So in other words, if we were back in the vacuum tube era and I was like, dude, there's this new thing, silicon chips. It's going to replace the vacuum tube. It's going to be amazing. Your brain automatically goes, no way, don't do that. Bad idea.
That's really interesting because that could be an interesting way to think about things. Again, as you say, you map out a way for entrepreneurs to think about that next generation. And almost everything that you might think is a bad idea, if looked at in a different way, could surprise you. Although
there's a great, I was going to say there's a great saying that if 99% of the people tell you your idea is crazy, you're either insane or about to make a massive breakthrough.
But it's interesting. It comes into conflict a little bit with a quote you have later on in the book from Jeff Bezos. So you model several, great and innovative billionaires or creators of billion-dollar companies. And I think this is the most incredible question I've read in your book, which is Jeff Bezos says, don't try to predict what's going to change in the next 10 years. Ask what's not going to change in the next 10 years. And off that question, he built his, multi-billion-dollar business, which I thought was just genius. Go ahead.
It's, one of the things that we did in the book, if you want to kind of take on these grand global challenges, you need to know how to think at scale and perform at speed, right? So we've got a whole section on flow states and on scaling up that, which allows you to perform at speed. And we've got a whole other section on how do you think at scale. And what, Jeff is talking about is long-term thinking, right? It's a way of thinking long-term. And I agree with you. I think it's one of the most amazing quotes in the business because his answer is phenomenal, right? People are never going to want their packages later, right? Nobody's going to call him and say, Jeff, I love that overnight delivery, but can I have it 2 weeks later, right? So as a way of, saying what's going to stay the same and building a business that way, and using that as one of your long-term thinking tools, it's an amazing hack.
Well, and he basically built his business around keeping the prices low, making delivery faster. And I guess that intersects with this exponential thinking. Okay, well, let's deliver with drones eventually. And so he sees that coming if drones truly grow, double every year or triple or quadruple or whatever every year. He sees this question of, what's not going to change intersecting with the idea that some things are going to change exponentially. And so I find it to be fascinating. Another billionaire you model is Elon Musk, and obviously he's kind of a point of fascination for everybody. He's supposedly the model for Iron Man, and you just talked about the Hyperloop idea. What has driven him? He's created so many companies that have been both evolutionary and revolutionary. What do you see drives his energy, like his inner purpose?
So I know Elon relatively well. He's been an investor in my companies as a board member at X Prize. I tried to talk him out of SpaceX early on, back before he started, because I had seen so many dead bodies on the road of building launch vehicles, and I'm glad he didn't do that. God knows he's revolutionized the industry. He's driven by the desire to make things better. He hates when he sees shitty products and services. And another very dear friend of both of ours, Adeo Resi, and he had a very famous drive across the U.S. in which, Elon identified, four basic things that he thought were the future of humanity coming out of college: internet, energy, space, and transportation. And he wanted to make a difference in all of those. And he has. He's built $4 billion industries, and he's driven by his passion and purpose. So in 2008, he had sold PayPal to eBay, and he had cashed out, probably on the order of a couple $100,000. When he started SpaceX, I'm sorry, a couple $100 million. When he started SpaceX, he invested well over $100 million, probably $125 million to SpaceX, and then started investing in SolarCity and in Tesla. But in 2008, when the economic downturn occurred, and SpaceX had its third launch failure in a row, and he had budgeted for 3 launch failures and not for any more, and the Tesla financing was failing, and SolarCity wasn't, all these things, he basically bet every dollar he had and went into debt. And you don't do that unless you're absolutely driven by your passion and, by each of us, by our own demons. But he bet everything.
So is that really, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but is that really true? Like, let's say the 4th launch had failed and bam, like, was he done at that point? Like, would he have had to start from scratch, or what's the real story there?
He was borrowing money to pay rent.
Yeah. The real story is he had bet everything. And if SpaceX had not had success, had not won the NASA contract, if Tesla had not gotten its financing, I mean, God knows whether these could have recovered at a much lesser valuation. But I think the tribute to Elon that most people don't see is the absolute fundamental belief and tenacity to bet everything in what your beliefs are, driven by your passion and purpose.
Yeah, no, he has a fascinating story, and I'm curious to ride the Hyperloop from New York to Los Angeles. That'll make my life a lot easier. So what's next for? So Peter, you're working on Planetary Resources, which is the company to essentially mine rare earth minerals on asteroids. Two questions there, and I know this is only peripherally related to the book, but I'm really curious. A, how likely is it? And B, why not mine for rare earth here in the U.S.? Because there's plenty of rare earth minerals right in the dirt in the U.S.
So, first of all, we talk about going after three different materials: fuels, construction materials, nickel, iron, cobalt, and then platinum group metals. And there is not platinum group metals right here in the U.S. When the Earth was formed, platinum and PGMs are siderophilic, they're loving, they're very high density, they sank to the center. The only place you actually find platinum in the Earth's crust, which is mostly light metals, boron, aluminum, and such, is where there had been previous asteroid impact sites. So we're actually mining asteroid impact sites. And the asteroids in space, in near Earth space, that are high in platinum are 1,000 times the concentrations. But our strategy right now is we're really focused in the near term on going after fuels, rocket fuel, hydrogen, oxygen, methane, because a lot of these asteroids are very rich in hydrogen and oxygen, and being able to fuel the continued expansion of the economy. And it's really, we're just trying to fundamentally build a business in space that is based on resources, which is what has always driven society to expand, right? The Silk Road, the American settlers looking for gold or spices or timber or oil or land or whatever it might be. It's looking for resources drives us.
I'm going to give you credit for that answer, but I'm also going to answer it slightly different for both of you, because what I see is it's like being a little kid and everybody's fascinated by going into space and being an astronaut, and Steven, being an extreme athlete, being a surfer. You guys basically created businesses and wrote books as if you were little kids doing whatever you wanted to do.
We are little kids.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it's a compliment. I think everybody would like that. I think that's the future of the workforce, actually. So
yeah, it's following your passion. Absolutely.
And given that, I think it's hard for a lot of people to follow their passion. Now, you're both very smart people, and like Peter, I look at your resume and what you've done from like birth on, practically. When have you had a down moment?
Oh man.
Tell me your worst moment.
I mean, listen, in 1999, 2000, I got a phone call from a guy named Bill Gross, who was running Idea Lab at the time. It just raised $1 billion from folks like Steven Spielberg and others. And he says, Peter, I want to build a company to do a private mission to the moon. He said, I have $60 million set aside. Would you be the CEO of it? I sold my house in a day and moved from DC to Pasadena to run this company, of this stealth company called Blastoff. And it was amazing. The challenge was that, 18 months later or 15 months later in April of 2001, when the dot-com revolution smashed down, I had to close down the company and went into this, not a depression, but a recounting of what am I doing? Where am I going? What's going on? And we've all had that. I've had companies, at least a third of my companies have had spectacular failures. A third have been tremendous successes, and a third will find out where they go. But whenever you do anything really hard and really big, whether it's going to moon, mining asteroids, building rockets, extending the healthy human lifespan, you have to realize that your chance of success are less than 50-50. Sometimes they're 10%, but you keep going because your ability to make them successful is stronger than ever before. given the tools, the mindsets, the technologies we have. And that's what Bold is about, is how do you increase your odds and actually go for bigger swings at the bat?
Well, and you're both working on different projects involving, extending lifespan. Peter, you have human longevity. Stephen, you have your project on flow. What's the status? Are we ever, as a race, gonna be, or as a species, gonna be able to live longer than, let's say, the maximum age that someone's lived?
I mean, just look at the history and realize that we've had a continuing growth in the healthy human lifespan.
But that's largely because the average has gone up, not necessarily because there's more 80-year-olds. Like there's less infant mortality.
The average has gone up, and health has gone up, and the ability to combat the diseases of cancer, heart disease, and neurodegenerative disease has gone up, and those are all things that add on. But the thing which we're doing right now is the realization that. So I'll ask you a question. There are species of sea turtles and whales that live for hundreds of years, and the question is, why can they and why can't we? And I would posit it's because they have certain genes or proteins or sequencing that gives them protection or gives them extension and so forth. We're going to discover that in the next decade.
And so what does that mean? Let's say we discover what genes do it for them. Then what happens? Do we just inject it into ourselves? I know this sounds like a stupid question, but I have no clue.
Well, the answer is yes and no. There are two mechanisms. One, my business partner at HLI, co-founder and now the CEO, Craig Venter, actually has a company called Synthetic
mildly intelligent guy.
Yeah, a pretty brilliant guy, and has a company called Synthetic Genomics, which he stepped down as CEO to take over as CEO of HLI. And synthetic genomics is about rewriting the genome and repairing and changing. So yes, we could go in, and if there's a specific set of genes need to be turned on, that can be done. The second co-founder is a guy named Bob Hariri, who's built a multi-billion-dollar stem cell companies. And stem cells are a part of HLI. And the idea is we could take out your stem cells. We can rejuvenate them. We can rewrite the code so that they're expressing certain genes or not certain genes, and re-inject them into you. Now, we turn over our cells, all of our cells, on a regular basis in the human body. So imagine if the stem cells that you're now using to replace your skin, your liver, your lungs, whatever it might be, have this new code in them, which allows you to live longer, to protect you against cancer or against neurodegenerative disease. This is the direction we're heading.
So it reminds me of, I think it's Arthur C. Clarke who said, what seems like, the science of today was magic yesterday, or some quote like that. What do you think? Yeah. What do you see that you're almost even afraid to talk about because people will think you're crazy? What's the magic today that's going to be science tomorrow?
I have one, and I'll throw it out, Stephen, if you have other. One option is, are we living in a virtual existence right now? Is this really an end?
You sort of intersect with Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, on that, actually.
Yeah, well, I sort of reached the conclusion that we're living in an nth generation virtual existence already. So,
and why is that?
Because what I see is people building virtual reality at more and more fidelity and more capabilities. And we will develop a virtual reality existence where you can't differentiate between reality and virtual reality, and create entities inside of that in the artificial intelligence world. And the question is, won't they ultimately go and create their own virtual reality? And, I have to believe in a 15 billion-year-old universe that we're not the first, and we're some infinite sequence thereof.
I love that. And Stephen, what about you? What seems like magic but is science tomorrow?
Well, I along the same lineage that Peter's looking at, I'm a couple steps closer. I work on flow states, which we know are the most addictive states on Earth, and we understand kind of the neurochemistry underneath what generates them. Right now, video games and virtual reality, they can generate dopamine, a couple of these neurochemicals, but you get all five and you get like the most deeply meaningful, positive experiences known to man. What that means is there's going to come a point very soon, right, when virtual reality becomes more fun and more meaningful than regular reality. And what I see happening then is a giant migration into virtual reality. I also think, by the way, you asked the question earlier, where are jobs coming from? I think one of the places we're going to find jobs is I think we've got an internet-sized economy inside of virtual reality that's going to be coming online over the next 10 years.
Well, you guys, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. The book is called Bold, How to Go Big, Create Wealth, and Impact the World. And I want to not only recommend that book, but I also want to recommend your prior book, Abundance, The Future is Better Than You Think. I think both these books are excellent. One almost feels like the sequel to the other. And Stephen, of course, we talked earlier this year about The Rise of Superman. All of these books have been game-changing for me. So I really appreciate you guys coming on the podcast.
Thank you. If you go to boldbook.com, you can get an audio download of the first chapter, get additional videos, and learn more. And it's really, for us, it's an inspiration to help entrepreneurs really go big and impact the world in a positive fashion, because we now can, and I think it's a moral obligation that we do.
Well, thanks again. Thanks very much. And gosh, I look forward to the next book.
Take care, guys.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having us.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
For more from James, check out the James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network at stansberryradio.com and get yourself on the free insiders list today.
Walmart's Black and Unlimited platform is making it easier than ever to support Black-owned brands. When you go to walmart.com/Black and Unlimited, you'll not only get to shop products from Black-owned brands, but also learn about founders like Janelle Stevens of Camille Rose, which specializes in products for naturally curly hair, or the Allison Devon, founder of Teespressa, and there are many more awesome products that you have yet to discover. It's all easy to find with Walmart's Black and Unlimited platform. Join in on celebrating Black brands today and every day at Walmart. We are Black and Unlimited. Visit walmart.com/Black and Unlimited to discover more. That's walmart.com/Black and Unlimited.